The sea was quiet. Too quiet. Then a man looked into the dark water and whispered, "Iceberg, right ahead." But it was already too late. The night stretched across the Atlantic like a sheet of black glass. Cold wind drifted over the ocean while stars burned brightly above. In the middle of that endless darkness moved the RMS Titanic, glowing like a floating palace. People called it the greatest ship in the world. Some even believed it could never sink. But the ocean listened in silence, and the ocean had other plans. In April 1912, crowds gathered in Southampton to watch the giant ship depart. Wealthy passengers arrived in elegant coats while poor families carried worn bags and sleepy children. Workers rushed across the dock, musicians played cheerful songs, and excitement filled the air. A young boy named Daniel stood beside his mother, staring up at the enormous ship. He asked softly if it was truly the biggest ship in the world, and she smiled proudly, telling him they were lucky to be there. To Daniel, the Titanic did not look like a ship at all. It looked like a dream made of iron and light. High above the passengers, Captain Edward Smith watched quietly. This would be his final voyage before retirement. The passengers trusted him, the crew trusted him, and he trusted the Titanic. Perhaps too much. As the ship slowly left port, thousands of people waved goodbye from the shore. Some cried while others laughed and cheered. Nobody imagined that many aboard would never return. The first days at sea felt magical. Rich passengers danced beneath golden chandeliers while children played games on the deck. Families shared warm meals together, and music drifted softly through the hallways each night. Daniel spent his time exploring every corner of the ship. One evening he accidentally bumped into a girl near the staircase. Her name was Emma, and after laughing at his clumsy apology, the two quickly became friends. Together they wandered across the decks counting stars and watching the endless sea. One cold night Emma admitted that the ocean frightened her. She whispered that it felt like something was hiding beneath the dark water. Daniel looked out at the black waves rolling silently beside the ship and admitted he felt the same. The sea seemed alive somehow, patient and waiting. As the days passed, everything still appeared perfect, but warning signs began to arrive. Messages from nearby ships reported dangerous icebergs ahead. One warned of a massive ice field directly in the Titanic's path. Still, many crew members were not concerned. The Titanic was considered too advanced, too powerful, too strong to fail. People believed nothing in nature could truly harm it. And belief can become dangerous when it grows larger than caution. On the fourth night, the temperature dropped sharply. The air became bitterly cold, and the ocean looked strange. The water was smooth and silent, without waves. One crewman stared nervously into the darkness and muttered that he did not like the feeling in the air. Another sailor laughed at him, but unease spread quietly across the ship like a shadow no one wanted to name. Near midnight, Daniel could not sleep. He stepped onto the deck and gazed upward at the millions of stars overhead. Then suddenly a bell shattered the silence. Iceberg right ahead. Panic erupted instantly. Men shouted orders across the deck while officers commanded the ship to turn. Engines roared as the Titanic tried to avoid disaster, but the giant vessel moved too slowly. A terrible scraping sound ripped through the night like metal screaming in pain. Daniel fell hard to the floor as confusion spread around him. Passengers looked at one another nervously, asking what had happened and whether it was serious. Then, for a brief moment, everything became quiet again. Too quiet. Below the ship, freezing seawater rushed through torn steel compartments. One room flooded, then another, then another. Engineers stared in horror as they realized the impossible truth. The Titanic was sinking. Captain Smith stood frozen when he learned the damage was fatal. When he asked how long the ship had left, the answer came quietly, perhaps 2 hours. The unsinkable ship was dying in the middle of the ocean. At first many passengers refused to believe it. Some continued drinking coffee, playing cards, and laughing nervously. But slowly fear spread through the hallways. The floor tilted beneath their feet. Cold air drifted through the ship. Crew members uncovered the lifeboats, revealing another terrible truth: there were nowhere near enough boats for everyone aboard. Soon officers began shouting, "Women and children first." Panic exploded across the decks. People pushed, cried, and begged for space. Daniel clung tightly to his mother's hand while nearby Emma desperately searched for her missing father. Her voice disappeared into the chaos unanswered. Even as disaster closed in, the ship's musicians continued to play. Their music floated through the freezing air while terrified passengers fought to survive. When someone asked why they were still performing, the bandleader answered sadly that the music helped people remain calm. So they kept playing while the ocean slowly climbed toward them. Daniel and his mother finally reached a lifeboat when he suddenly heard Emma crying his name. She stood alone, trembling with fear, unable to find her father. Daniel looked at his mother, and without hesitation she told him to bring the girl with them. The sailor guarding the boat protested that there was almost no room left, but after a long pause he allowed Emma aboard. Slowly the lifeboat descended into the dark ocean below. From the freezing water, Daniel looked back at the Titanic. The ship still glowed brilliantly against the night sky, its lights shining as music drifted faintly over the sea. It seemed impossible that something so enormous could vanish. But it could. And it did. The front of the ship dipped lower and lower into the icy water. People screamed as metal cracked apart with a sound like thunder. The Titanic began to break in two. Lights flickered wildly before the ship rose almost straight into the air. Then, in one horrifying moment, it disappeared beneath the ocean. Gone. The lights vanished. The music stopped. Only screams remained. Hundreds of passengers were left floating in water so cold it stole life within minutes. Daniel covered his ears, but he could still hear the desperate cries echoing through the darkness. Calls for help. Calls for mercy. Calls for one more chance to live. Hours later, silence returned to the Atlantic. A terrible silence. Above the ocean, the stars continued shining as though nothing had happened at all. In the early morning, the RMS Carpathia arrived and rescued the survivors. Daniel, his mother, and Emma survived, though Emma never found her father again. They stepped aboard the rescue ship cold, shaking, and forever changed. Days later, newspapers across the world carried the same shocking headline: "The Titanic has sunk." People could barely believe it. The greatest ship ever built now rested deep beneath the ocean floor, and more than 1,500 people had died that night. Rich and poor, young and old, the sea had treated them all the same. Years later, Daniel still remembered the stars, the freezing wind, and the terrible sound of the ship breaking apart. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he imagined he could still hear the distant music drifting across the water. Soft. Sad. Beautiful. A final song swallowed by darkness. People once believed the Titanic was too strong to fail. But the ocean taught humanity a painful lesson that night: nothing built by human hands is greater than nature. And sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is not the iceberg waiting ahead. It is human pride. Even today, the Titanic rests deep beneath the cold Atlantic Ocean. Silent. Dark. Sleeping beneath the waves like a ghost the sea refuses to forget.